for this evening is the following. We're going to watch a 37-minute DVD about fracking. It, I think one can say, presents one side a little more than the other. And then we will open the floor to questions to Glenn Wahl, who is here with us, who is a professor of geology and has studied this question very deeply. Horizontal high-volume hydrofracking is a relatively new industry that has provoked intense controversy. The League of Women Voters of Chautauqua County has put a lot of effort into educating itself on the complicated issues involved. It's not simply a case of private gain versus public loss, of conservation versus economic development, and simple dualistic thinking won't provide the light to guide us and our public officials. In the League, we've come to a consensus, but we want everyone to arrive at an informed opinion about the dangers and benefits of fracking, based on facts, not fictions. One person who's done a tremendous amount of research on the topic is Glenn Wahl, a geologist and teacher at JCC. And after we show the video, which is called The Ethics of Fracking, he'll answer your questions and we hope lead a discussion of the many factors involved. Thank you.
We're producing more natural gas than we ever have before, with hundreds of thousands of good jobs to show for it.
I didn't move into the country to be looking at an industrial revolution right up the road from me.
I don't recall hearing about water being on fire.
And sometimes it will light quite spectacularly.
Basically, the technology is safe as far as we can tell.
And the emissions that come out of that are carcinogens, and I don't want to get cancer again.
Drilling for natural gas, or fracking, has been going on in the United States for 60 years. New techniques called slick-water, high-pressure, horizontal drilling, introduced in the last decade, have made the extraction of natural gas cheaper. But at what cost? As this industrial process encroaches on our residential and agricultural areas, negative effects to our environment and health are becoming evident. Yet, fracking continues to move forward despite any long-term studies on the damage it may cause. This film examines the ethical and moral issues surrounding the process called fracking.
Fracking is a technology that allows us to access natural gas at a very deep depth, typically between 5,000 and 8,000 feet. It's a way of drilling into the subsurface and then accessing that material through a series of injections of a high-pressure solution that basically cracks open this rock and allows the gas to then come back up to the surface.
On the one hand, you have to think about the benefits you get out of fracking. You get cheaper energy, you get jobs, you get energy independence, so that we're not held over a barrel by OPEC in the Middle East. All of those things have obvious benefits.
It's something that they've talked about it being a bridge energy that kind of transition us perhaps from some other fuels that we're running out of, things such as coal and oil.
So when you talk about cons, you have to include the potential for damage to the environment that fracking can do.
So if you look at the process of fracking, first of all, there is the actual fracking, injecting the sort of poisonous cocktail of liquids into the ground that has the danger of water pollution. Then you have the process of actually the gas escaping, and then you have methane, the gas coming up, and then you have gas escaping into the atmosphere.
Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, about 24, 28 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So is that a concern of that now escaping into the atmosphere if the well construction is not done properly. There's a lot of water that's required to do hydraulic fracturing, several million gallons typically. That water is injected and then it will come back up to the surface. Now it comes back up with the frac fluid, but with some of the other materials that have been down there, typically high dissolved solids, and that gets to be an issue. How do you dispose of this properly and not cause problems other places?
Then you have the problem of once they take the gas out of the ground, they put them into compressor stations, and these compressor stations actually cause a great deal of air pollution. There is a county in Wyoming where the most fracking is that now has a smog problem worse than Los Angeles. And the entire process actually causes noise pollution. The people who live near fracking are complaining all the while of the horrible noise.
Right behind me, you can see and hear two flaring gas wells. You can hear how loud it is. It sounds like a jet engine.
So if you're living near this, where it was once very pristine and quiet, it can get very noisy while some of these activities are going on.
When they frack in forests or other pristine areas, they have to put in new roads. The new roads themselves are detrimental to the wildlife there, and putting in these drill pads is detrimental to the wildlife. So it's clear that fracking in natural forests and other areas, which is going on, is very destructive to the natural environment. Then we have the problem of the pipelines themselves. Some of these pipelines are dangerous. We have had, instances in the United States and other places of pipelines exploding. And there's also the question, similarly to creating the roads to have the trucks come in, you have to destroy some areas to put the pipeline in. So that is another destruction of the environment.
We've had a significant increase in the numbers of accidents happening on the roadways in rural Pennsylvania because of fracking. And there are other bad social outcomes and social problems created by fracking. It basically destroys local communities. It adds to the anonymity of the community because only certain kinds of people know how to do that work, so it invites them in and drives others out. You've had a significant increase in rural Pennsylvania in the phenomenon of sexual diseases, and that's in part attributed to the trafficking that takes place around various mining operations. Again, people don't know each other. They use each other. There's a culture of anonymity, and there's a culture of social decline that's brought about by fracking. So there's social impacts that take place as well as environmental impacts. All of them are bad.
Really, most important point to begin with is that there's so much uncertainty. So I think we can agree that when you read the scientific literature, it's quite difficult to know just how to assess the ethics of fracking. So you've got arguments on both sides. You have good reason to be concerned about air quality, about water quality, about methane emissions, about spoiling of the local environments. You've got reason to be concerned too about what's going to happen with the local community. So there are definite moral concerns.
Well, there are several categories to think about whether fracking is ethical or not. One category is transparency. If something is not open and transparent, then we begin to have ethical questions. So the fracking industry, for example, has done everything it can to hide what the contents of the fracking fluid is. So using poisonous fluid and not revealing to the public what exactly is in there, that's not an ethical practice. The fracking industry went out of its way to get an exemption from the Clean Water Act, known in the world as the Halliburton Loophole. Now, if they believed that what they were doing was totally safe, why would they want an exemption from the Clean Water Act? So there's some ethical questions there looking for an exemption. Then there's the ethical questions of they know that their casings have a limited lifespan. They're made of concrete. Concrete does not last an infinite amount of time. According to all of the industry reports of the people who make the concrete pipelines, I think the best case scenario is they might last 100 years, maybe.
This bubbling is occurring in a pool of water that's accumulated around the wellhead. This is methane and perhaps other hydrocarbon gases leaking from outside the well and getting into the atmosphere. This occurrence is not uncommon. Data from Pennsylvania in the last 3 years show that this kind of leaking occurs in about 1 out of every 20 brand new wells. Industry data shows over time that that kind of leakage begins to occur much more frequently as the wells age.
So they know that in time it's going to cause a problem. They're denying that. That's not ethical behavior.
This is a case of uncertainty. We know precisely that we don't know whether fracking will really present significant harms to, again, human health, to the environment, and to local communities. The question then is what criteria the gas companies and government authorities as well need to meet before we can say that going ahead with fracking would be justified, that there would be good moral reason to frack.
It's typical in American thinking about ethics to use a cost-benefit analysis. But a cost-benefit analysis is too narrow for the issues that are being raised by fracking. So there is another risk management principle, the precautionary principle, that evaluates activities in the light of surely economic impact, but also social, environmental, human health, etc. So there's another principle that is more holistic, that looks at the whole situation and not just the cost and not just the economic benefit over against potential harms.
But in general, I think most professionals, we take an oath or we sign on that whatever our activity is to do no harm, or to, as an engineer, to protect human health and the environment. Could it be done better? Yes, in my opinion. Could it be more transparent? Perhaps. Should there be more oversight? There's just things we don't know. It's not like everything is a black and white thing. Do we see an immediate effect if there's a problem with this or something? I would like to have seen a better approach to a long-term planning and a more organized approach on how this fits in, and what we do if something does happen, more contingency plans.
Proceeding with fracking ethically, you have to think about a number of issues. What we need to be doing is proper accounting for everything we do, and that includes including harm to the environment. You have to include that in the cost of doing business. If you don't, you're cooking the books.
Well, if one examines the congressional committees that make the regulations around fracking or around extractions, one then sees that the campaign contributions to the Congress people who serve on those committees from the energy industries is rather large. So yes, the evidence is circumstantial, but when you see very large contributions from energy companies going to the Congress people who sit on the committees that write the regulations for those industries, and the regulations for those industries are rather lax, one begins to wonder what the relationship between the contributions and the regulations is. So ethical would be that people who sit on congressional committees that make rules about the energy industry shouldn't be accepting contributions from the energy industry. That would be an ethical practice.
A philosopher named John Rawls, who was an important 20th century political thinker, talked about the curse of money in politics. You need money in politics. We know that. Since the 70s, since the Buckley decision, the Supreme Court really has allowed money to flood our political process, and money does really talk. So money was considered to be a form of speech, and if money is a form of speech, money talks quite loudly and has a lot of power in forming policies. Policies not always in the interest of citizens. So if I'm President Obama, this is what makes the ethics of fracking complicated. You got to assess it within your global energy policy. So different forms of energy have downsides and upsides. Take nuclear energy. I mean, gosh, why not do that instead of fracking? Well, there too we know the dangers. There's good reason to be quite wary. You'll hear that argument made sometimes, well, we need the energy. Natural gas is better than coal. Yes, poses threats to the local environment. When you hear that, sometimes though people act as if those threats to the local environment and threats to the people who live on farms close to fracking, sometimes people act as if or talk as if those threats don't need to be redressed somehow or other. Well, just too bad for those people. They've got to make sacrifices for the national good. If that were the final assessment, then you'd have to take some measures to right the wrongs as best as possible that these people have suffered.
We don't even know if we can clean up an aquifer that's been fouled by fracking wastewater or fracking toxic chemicals or radioactive wastewater, things like that. We don't even know that we can accomplish that. So people are worried about that, and I believe President Obama is worried about that too. I don't think he has any intention of walking away from responsible environmental regulation, and I have no doubt that he will be on board with what I regard as a very important campaign, and that is for national standards for proper hydraulic fracturing instead of a patchwork of states. The problem with just doing a patchwork of state regulations for hydraulic fracturing is that you have differing standards from state to state, and you can have differing standards. What does that lead to? The state that imposes the least restrictions, the state that taxes it the least, is the one that's trying to attract more of that industry into its borders, and that's what you get. You get a race to the bottom unless you have uniform national standards, and that's what I'd like to see.
For a person as intelligent and well-informed as President Obama is, it would be hard to believe that he doesn't know more about fracking. He seems to be caught in a hard place between environmentalists and the energy industry. I do think that he needs to act more resolutely against fracking. Right now, the environmental issue he's most caught up on is the Keystone Pipeline, where he also seems to be in a hard place and trying to make a decision. He frequently says all the right words about climate change, and he's certainly done some good things in terms of the EPA of trying to make new regulations that cut down on pollution. But I have to say, in terms of fracking, he has not stepped up to the plate.
So, as president, my first step, bring heads together, try to come to some clarity. In the meantime, sure, it seems like a moratorium would be appropriate. Otherwise, you're rushing to action without really being clear on the consequences.
In 2011, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett penned Act 13, a measure to collect a small impact fee and to establish distances of gas wells and processing facilities from homes and water supplies. Along with this bill came several gifts to the gas industry. One component was the stripping of local zoning laws when permitting gas facilities like wells, pipelines, and compressor stations. The other, a physician's gag order to keep secret their chemical mixture, which hinders doctors from treating their patients to their fullest potential.
When a patient comes in and I suspect that he may be affected by a chemical that may be in the area of a well, whether it be from a spill, whether it be that he was working on the well in particularly, I'm not allowed, after I find out about the chemicals, including the ones that are considered trade secrets, to divulge that to anybody else in particular. Ethically, I should be able to tell the patient what he or she has been exposed to. Where it becomes a problem, and the law does not state where our responsibilities stop at that point. The patient may tell a family member or may tell somebody else. However, my responsibility once I tell the patient is also to write a note or a contract with the gas company saying that I will not divulge this information to anybody else. So it becomes privileged information, and I think that's really a mistake. In that part, it is specific. I cannot divulge this to anybody else, including another physician that I may want to refer to, or a poison control center, for example. They would have to also make the request and as well sign a waiver saying that they will not divulge this further. This creates a problem because not a lot of information is out there about how these chemicals are going to impact, a person or a community at large. And frankly, I haven't been too impressed that even the company itself knows all the particular chemicals that's going into a particular well. I mean, they do so much subcontracting that it wouldn't be unusual for me to think that if I make a call and try to get all the chemicals involved, that they will refer me to 7 or 8 other companies who themselves may want to get waivers of confidentiality as well. And that just compounds the problem.
With all the stories out there, some people were surprised that we allowed fracking on our land. But we talked with experts and learned the facts about drilling for oil and natural gas. And guess what? It's safe. Safe for our land, our water, and the air.
Well, when the industry says fracking is safe, they are not defining the word safe. So if we mean by safe that no drinking water will be contaminated, one could say that they are not telling the truth, because the evidence on the ground is that we know, proven, factual, that there are people who live near fracking who can no longer use their drinking water, who can no longer use water to feed their animals because their animals have gotten sick from the drinking water. That is a fact. If the water is harming animals and the water is harming people, the water is not safe. That has been caused by fracking. Therefore, fracking is not safe. So the facts on the ground indicate that it's not safe.
I've seen these commercials on, safe. I mean, we can argue, how do you define safe? I mean, a lot of those people, they were family farmers that were going to lose their farm. They basically had no other choice to keep it, and they've not had any problems. On the other hand, we've heard stories about when there's been some terrible problems, when people had their water contaminated or other illnesses.
When they say that fracking is safe, and they know that there are negative outcomes and some significant negative outcomes, they're lying. But they do so in accordance with a well-established business principle. That is, say it's good, insist that it's good, and people will believe you if you say it often enough.
The industry itself shows that at least 4 or 5% of the methane escapes from the wells isn't captured. That is significant global warming. There are other studies that seem to indicate that even more than 4 or 5% escape from the wells. So is that safe? If you're concerned about global warming and global climate change, that's not safe either.
I think a lot of this is still very new. We don't know. Maybe it's safe in the short term, but is it safe in the long term? So that's some of the questions we have to ask. And then some of the stuff we may not get a second chance with, particularly if a water supply is affected. What do we do now to fix that? So that's, it's concerning. On the other hand, we need the energy. Is there a way to balance this?
Gas industry advertising can be deceiving in many ways. For example, it takes about 4 million gallons of fresh water to frack a well. Once it is mixed with chemicals and comes back up from the ground, it can't be cleaned enough to return to the ecosystem with current technology. Looking at this ad, it leads you to believe that they are suggesting they are attempting to recycle all of the water they use, when in fact it's just the water that comes back up from the well. The company can reuse some of it in another frack job, but it will eventually find its way into an injection well deep inside the ground, where it will remain forever. These injection wells are known to cause earthquakes around the world.
Cabot and water use committed to 100% recycling. It's probably, once again, on the border there, because there's really nothing incorrect about that statement, but what are they leaving out? They don't tell you where they're doing it and how they're doing it. So I would like to have seen more specifics about that. So once again, I think people want to do the right thing. You want to believe that. Could they be doing this better? I think perhaps yes.
There should be attached a responsibility for speaking untruth. That in itself is a significant ethical lapse, and it's better if we can attribute honesty to business interests rather than mendacious statements such as fracking is safe. Part of the problem is that people get greedy, and some people have made a lot of money on fracking. And so to the few go the spoils, and they ignore or lie about the truth of what in fact is being done.
I think the important point is that we know we don't really know, and in cases where we know we don't really know, though we're aware there are moral risks here, it falls on the actors, the persons who want to proceed with fracking, whether they be the natural gas companies or government authorities. It falls on those people to do a lot of legwork to make it really clear that matters are safe. And misleading statements, advertising campaigns that obfuscate the fact that we don't really know, those are morally objectionable.
I don't believe that God would frack. The God that I worship and that many people revere is a God of justice, a God of truth and honesty, and a God of integrity. And as such, then, knowing full well the implications of fracking on human health, on the soil, on biotic life, on human communities, God wouldn't frack. There's lots of poison, there's toxicity everywhere, but you don't make the claim that it's good because it's there.
Well, in the Jewish tradition, which the one I'm most familiar with, the wisdom story that has come down, that's at least a couple of thousand years old, is that God said to Adam, see the world, see how beautiful it is, it's your responsibility to take care of it, because if you destroy it, there's nobody to come after it to save it. So human beings have the responsibility of stewardship over creation. That is true in pretty much every religious tradition that I know of, including the Native American tradition, people who cared for our land first. So human beings' responsibility towards creation is to be good stewards of it. In the Native American tradition, it's to make sure that the seventh generation has the same opportunities and resources that we have. It's looking at things way into the future. Every religious tradition says that the earth is sacred and that we have a responsibility to respect the sacredness of the earth and to maintain the environment in a healthy and responsible way. All of the evidence is that fracking hurts the environment. All of the forms of extreme extraction, fracking, tar sands, deep water Arctic drilling, mountaintop removal, all of those things are like raping the earth. They are a violation of what our religious traditions tell us about the human responsibility to be good stewards over the earth.
Well, my own view is that we need national standards, and to do that, we need to make sure that oil and gas companies comply with national environmental standards. We're talking about statutes that have been in effect in this country for dozens of years. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA. All of these are very, very well established and well thought out environmental statutes to cover the entire United States that every industry in the United States has to comply with, except one, and that's the oil and gas industry. Why does it have exemptions from them? Because they can. Because they've got all this money to do lobbying with. And that's the only reason. It's not because it makes sense, not because it's ethical, not because people want exemptions for the oil and gas industries because it's logical or anything like that. It's only because it's a power play, because of the money involved in that industry. My own view is all of those exemptions have to be repealed. Of all of the industries that can afford to treat the environment with kindness, the oil and gas is right up there. They've got lots of money. They can do it the right way. They can think things through and make sure that they do their extractions in a safe and environmentally friendly way, ways that are not going to foul the aquifers, ways that are not going to pollute people's wells, ways that are not going to pollute the air. In my view, it should be a national standard, and to do that, you repeal these loopholes for the oil and gas industry. So we've done that. We've introduced legislation in this Congress to repeal the loopholes in all 4 of those statutes. And I myself have introduced 2 bills in the 113th Congress. The Cleaner Act removes the oil and gas company exemption from RCRA, which deals with hazardous waste. Every other company in the United States has to comply with proper disposal techniques for hazardous waste. Well, we know that wastewater from fracking is not regulated in any way right now, and it should be, because we know that there are toxins involved. There's benzene. Benzene causes cancer. There's toluene. Toluene causes cancer. There is radioactive isotope involved. Radioactivity causes cancer. We need to worry about these things, and if we're going to regulate them properly, the RCRA exemption for oil and gas has to be removed.
And we as citizens need to organize first to preserve our democratic system, overturn laws that allow unlimited campaign contributions. So first we have to work on democracy, and then we have to work on trying to get the laws changed that protect the environment and make the energy companies act in responsible ways. We are all in this together. Climate change affects everybody. Water pollution affects everybody. Air pollution affects everybody. We need to come from an ethic of interconnectedness, of interbeing, realizing that something that harms our neighbor harms us. Something that harms the earth harms us. And to take responsibility for making sure that we protect each other as we protect the earth.
I would like to see more information and better decisions, as well as a long-term plan. I think a lot of this is, it's this big rush now, but how is this all coordinated? And then where do we locate things like the compressor stations? If we want to use the natural gas as a resource, how do we get it to who needs it? I heard on the news the other night, I guess New York is very excited. They're starting to get natural gas in to switch out a lot of the places where they've used heating oil to heat. So is that a good thing? I mean, that's going to make their air quality better, but at what cost to where the natural gas is coming from? And it was an interesting interview. They were talking to people, and they thought this was great. Their prices are going to go down, but yet at what cost to where the gas is coming from? So I think we need, to increase awareness about this. Who should do it? That's the tough thing. How do we is it the government? Is it private parties? Is it some combination of that? I think hopefully we'll get this figured out.
What I would do with regards to hydraulic fracking is look at its impact on human communities and on the earth itself, and evaluate it in the light of whether it contributes to the well-being of human beings or the earth, or takes from and harms the community and the planet.
We are really robbing our children, grandchildren, of a safe and healthy future. We have to be responsible citizens. Unfortunately, we have been trained to become consumers and passive. And the history and tradition of America is strong only when we are active citizens.
In the end, the power really belongs to us, the consumer, the citizen, the voter. We need to be better informed about the consequences of our actions, to make informed decisions about our energy future, decisions that will affect ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren.
So this was 37 minutes, and it touched on, probably 30 or so different controversies, different issues within the fracking topic. And probably we could raise the screen and write 100 more on the board pretty easily. It's certainly one of those things that, depending on where you get your source of information, you tend to feel one way. If you get your source of information from somewhere else, you might feel a different way. The purpose for the rest of this time here, as I understand it, is if you have questions about it, I'll be glad to do my best. I'm no expert. As I say, I have degrees in geology and environmental biology. And actually watching this, because I taught environmental issues and ethics last semester. And you do get into all those different ethical issues, and there's so many different ways to look at it. But I'll do my best to answer questions, and when I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know.
Can everybody hear? Can you hear? Okay.
Teacher voice. And I've been teaching all day, so it's a little long. But I will, I guess, say that I've studied this issue for hundreds and hundreds of hours. Mostly the science side. I've been doing a lot of reading on a lot of different studies that have been done both by the industry and universities and other organizations. Trying to keep up with the politics. That's pretty confusing sometimes. And certainly trying to keep up with all the most recent issues. But so if you have any questions, fire away. Maybe with all this many people here, it might be better to go by hands. But, feel free. Yeah.
But first, I just want to, thank the League of Women Voters and Youth for bringing such a fair and balanced and impartial video to the evening.
You thought it was fair and impartial?
No, I didn't. No,
we don't pretend that it is.
Yeah.
We think it raises the issues that we need to discuss.
Well, that it does. Yeah. The video, well, first let me ask you, you said early on, when I think many people weren't listening, what your credentials and your background is. You said you were not a professor, not geology, but rather an instructor.
Right.
You worked in the industry at all?
No, I haven't. I came this close because back in the 70s when I graduated college, everybody was getting jobs in the oil boom back then. Right. Getting the big sum of, what, $28,000, I think it was. Yeah. But I decided to go into teaching instead at $8,000. So I missed the big boom. But,
all right. Well, I just want to make sure that
sure. No, I make no claims about being an industry professional or anything else. I found it fascinating reading about all of the industrial aspects.
Well, one thing I just want to point out is, I guess, the film is entitled Ethics of Fracking, right, and discusses certain ethics throughout. One of the things, and my first comment is, where do I begin? We could spend days and days. Right. I would love the opportunity to sit sometime and go through the film, and we'd be stopping it about every 20 seconds to debate each and every aspect of it, because one of the questions raised was, partial truths and lies, misrepresentations. Of course, being the film that it is, it's pointing fingers at industry for doing that. Well, I can tell you, it works in both directions. And that film is fraught with lies and misconceptions.
Okay, well, since this is kind of question and answer, why don't you bring up one thing that you believe isn't true, and I'll see if I can agree with you or disagree.
Well, that'd be great. Okay, I'll bring up the one near the end. Would God frack? Okay, it raised a lot of.
I might be the wrong person.
A lot of people in the news, but I'll just share with the audience here. There's 63 wells drilled in Western New York on Catholic diocesan properties, including the first one in the late 1800s by Father Baker, who appreciated the natural resource that God put there.
Right,
and most of those churches are heated with natural gas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, we're heated probably with natural gas.
Obviously, I'm using it as an example.
Horizontal or vertical though? Because I think the reason is
they're fracked. They're drilled and they're fracked.
But there's a difference, and that's one of the things that, because I recognize a lot of faces from the Chautauqua meeting, and I think that's one thing that got conflated that night, that it was really confusing for people that didn't know the difference.
Well, sir, can you explain the difference? Some people here are asking.
Okay, so when I do my little presentation, I start out with 9 things the industry says, and the next thing I say is every single one of those things is true. And one of those is we've been fracking since 1947, and that's absolutely true. The difference is, though, when you combine all the different elements, the slick water, the friction reducers, the volume. Like in New York now, you can frack all you want, as long as it's, 380,000 gallons or less. But when you combine that with lateral drilling, with the slick water, that was first done on a production scale in the Barnett shale in Texas in 1997, as you probably know. It was first done in the Marcellus, closer to us in Pennsylvania, in 2003. And it wasn't really until, and they kind of brought that up, it wasn't until the Energy Policy Act of 2005 was put in by Dick Cheney and crew, that really HVHF, high volume hydrofracking, took off. And you certainly didn't, even though vertical fracking has caused some problems with wells. I have friends up in Concord that will talk to you all day about the problems that conventional drilling and fracking has caused. But really, you certainly didn't see thousands of people out protesting that, did you? And so, it's been this new kind, the HVHF, that's caused the issues. So that's a big difference. So you have volume of both chemicals and water, and you have the directional lateral drilling, horizontals usually in this area, but lateral is a better term for it.
Can you comment on the DEC findings of the Concord issue, where they found that there was methane in the water?
No, because that was from like 6-7 years ago. I haven't
2008, right?
Yeah,
2008. The DEC determined that
I haven't hooked up with that, but can I answer the question?
But I've got all the documentation on that if you'd like to see.
Who do you represent?
That's fine.
Who do you work for?
But the point I was going to get to was, I think the reason Scott put this in was that for HVHF, this new kind of fracking that is causing the greater number of problems and the issues, there have been a lot of religious leaders that have come out against it, including the Pope Francis. There's a large group of nuns out in, gosh, what was it? Was it Michigan? Anyway, there's groups of nuns, there are groups of monks. It seems like there were a lot of religious people that have climbed on board against this new kind of fracking, and not just not just religious people, of course. We just had 1,000 medical professionals give Obama a petition to shut down nationally, to shut down fracking. We have in New York State, we have all sorts of medical professional societies that have come out against it. So yeah, there's, I know there's a lot of folks in here that are pro-fracking, and if you're pro-fracking, I hope you're pro, because really to me there's a very strong delineation. You can be pro-conventional drilling and fracking, you can be pro the new kind, HVHF, or you could be pro both. I mean, they certainly aren't one big thing. But I think the point to be made is that if you're for those kinds of things, you have to realize there's a lot of people that are against it. We have over 1,000 businesses in New York that have signed on against it. We have, what are some things? As you know, we have 176 municipalities that have enacted bans or moratoria. I mean, there's tons of professional groups, engineers, doctors that have said this isn't a good thing, we need to study it more, we have to look at it more.
And I understand, and my answer to that would be that we have 30+ states who are then apparently acting unethically because they are recommending that New York follow their...
Sure. As the film said, there's a lot of information that we need to get still.
Right.
I mean, I've been looking, and I've gone on tons, and who knows, maybe I've talked to you on some of those Facebook pages, the pro-fracking ones, because 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, I went on there first and said, I'm putting together a PowerPoint. And at that point, I was actually quite neutral on this. And I asked for information because I kept hearing fracking is safe, all these things are not issues. And I said, can you give me scientific studies where they looked at this and they found, the leak level would be such and such, et cetera, et cetera. I've got nothing. There was one paper published in 2012, you probably are familiar, called, I think it's called Hydrofracturing 101 by King. And that one was pretty thorough, but there's been essentially nothing since, and even that really didn't explain very much about it. There's a lot more in the way of studies that need to be made, health-wise, industry-wise. I've been looking tons for new information on well casing seal failure rates. Typically, if you look at the information that's 5 or 6 years old, typically you're finding an initial rate of 5% or so, and going to about 50% over 30 years. And those were industry numbers. I've been looking for new information on that, and it just isn't out there. So I think what I wanted to reiterate from this is we need a lot more information. There has to be a lot more transparency. We'll go here and then
yeah, there's more than one
Let me back
person
up
in
so I
this
can
community.
give
My name is Rose Saboyan, and I'm just a retired teacher, and I'm identifying myself as a person that's in the middle. You know, I don't know where I am, except I have an example. My nephew, I'm from Ohio originally, and recently, you talk about greed, a person bought some land next to our farm, and all our farms have well water. And he leased that land to fracking water from Pennsylvania. And they comes in great big trucks. And the trucks leak. And I know that because my nephew, to make money for college, had to help paint the tanks. And he said they're all leaking. And so he says, what do I do? And the foreman says, never mind, never mind. He gets the materials on himself. He's concerned. And I think that's where I guess I am. I think regulation is really important. And if you have a state like Texas and a state like Pennsylvania and a state like here and here, and they all have different regulations, and you have overnight maybe wellers coming in, where's the protection for my nephew? Where's the protection from my farm well that could very well be contaminated? You know, and that's what I'm scared about. And yet, on the other hand, I know we need energy at least so we can go, you know, cleaner. You know what I'm saying? So I think we all need to be respected for our views, you know, and I have not made up my mind, and I appreciate the League of Women Voters having this tonight, and I really ask, please, respect one another. We're all in this together.
Were there any questions in there?
Well, just what about, I'm trying to, what, it's not just fracking in one place. It has ramifications because you're taking that material, let's say New York decides, in Chautauqua County, and they take that material to my farm neighbor who has leased the land to have the, what is it, the infusion, where they put all that crap in the water?
Well?
That's it, injection well. So, I mean, we're all affected. That we, you know, and I think we need to be cautious. That's what we're asking.
Yeah, and there's several ways that New York is being affected already, even though we don't allow HVHF in the state. We do supply water to Pennsylvania. We also take Pennsylvania frac waste. We have 5 different landfills in New York that take it. And that's one of the problems that they mentioned here. They called it the Halliburton Loophole, but there are actually 7 environmental federal laws that have been mitigated for the oil and gas production industry only. And that's, to me, just my sense of fair play says that, okay, all industries should be the same. Why should this industry get, you know, favored over other ones? That if one company has to spend some money to make sure that things are cleaned up right, then, you know, all of them should. But anyway, because of that, because of that so-called Halliburton loophole, we have waste coming up from Pennsylvania that is classified industrial waste. And yet, if it wasn't for that legislation, it would be classified hazardous waste, and it would have to be treated in a very different way. So they're putting things in the landfills because of that, including radioactive substances, because as most of you know, the target formations like the Marcellus and the Utica, that's even how they find them. It's because they have high levels of natural radiation. And so because of that, when the frac fluid comes up, it is radioactive to a degree. And so a lot of the sludge, if they're filtering that out, is also radioactive. And a lot of that is going into our landfills. So there's lots of different ways that New York's being affected already. Yes, sir.
We learned that there's a lot of toxic secret cocktail chemicals going down, and as you said, that we're also getting things up. I'm just concerned about drilling water wells, deep water wells. I was in overseas in Bangladesh for 6 years, and part of the good work we did is we dug wells out in the villages, and here, you know, down 300 feet, we're poisoning them with arsenic, not knowing it's down there.
Yeah, well, the good news for this area in Pennsylvania is there's a big difference between where the Marcellus is and where the near surface aquifers are. But people always, and that's one of the things that I have in my little industry thing. There's a mile of solid rock that protects us. But there's been some studies that make that a little bit shakier. Well, number one, a lot of studies that show thermogenic methane, the stuff that is down at the Marcellus levels, does, through drilling, find its way up into groundwater. The Duke study, the University of Texas at Arlington study, not only methane, but other materials from down at that layer, barium, selenium, other materials, arsenic. All of those things, if they're tested for, the closer you are to drilling, the more likely you are to have that in your groundwater. And obviously, that's not coming up through the rock. That's coming up through the superhighway that we make every time we drill a well bore down there. And we have to, and this is where the industry has come, I think, a ways, but not as far as it needs to, from what I've read. We have to get a much better, if we're going to continue doing this, we have to get a much better cement seal. If you read the trade journals now, the warranties, the guy in the film said, maybe 100 years, but if you read the warranties, they're typically 3, 5, 6, 7 years for these seals, and that's really not good enough, because it does allow gas, when the seals fail, to come up, and sometimes it does what was shown in the picture, something called SCP that a lot of you know about, sustained casing pressure, where the methane bubbles up right around the wellhead. But you have to remember that we have a lot of natural fractures and joints in the rock. Africa hit us many millions of years ago, and if you go to area streams, you'll notice those joint patterns in the shale. They make this kind of an angle. Those are the ones caused by the continental collisions. And then if you look closely, you'll see that between those joints, there are other more random cracks connecting those things. Those are fractures caused by pressure release. As material was eroded and the land was uplifted, that release of pressure caused the rock to crack. The upshot is there's no such thing as solid rock. There's tons of cracks in joints, not even counting all the faults, and there's a lot of them in New York State if you ever look at a fault map, not even counting the literally tens of thousands of abandoned wells, some of which we know where they are, some of which we don't. But all of those things, if you are methane from down below or arsenic or some of the materials, all of those things provide a pathway to the surface. So not counting the well bores, can it come up? Because that's my concern too. We're leaving most of that toxic material down there, and it amounts to millions of gallons per well. Will that ever be a problem? The industry is saying no, it'll be perfectly fine, it'll stay right where it is. And yet, another earlier Duke study, Duke University, found that some of that has gotten up. They found ancient brine and ancient methane that had gotten up into aquifers. Now, was that drilling induced? No, it wasn't at all. It had naturally found its way up. And this was in northeast Pennsylvania, southern New York. And so I guess the point is, yeah, it's supposedly a mile of solid rock. Supposedly it will stay there. But this is one of those areas where we really don't know. We really don't have enough evidence. About a year ago, the industry pointed to a study that they had done that said, oh, this solves it. It's not migrating. It won't come up. Well, I looked at that very hopeful, because quite honestly, I really want to be convinced that fracking is safe. It would save me an awful lot of time. And it would make my life a lot easier in a lot of ways. But their study was, they had an 8,000-foot frac, 8,000 feet deep. They had 2 abandoned wells that went down to 5,000 feet, not too far from that. So you had a 3,000-foot difference. They waited 1 year. They took samples from the 2 abandoned wells at 5,000 feet. They found no tracers from the 8,000-foot well, and they proclaimed, oh, it must not be migrating. And yet, if you read the study, all that you can conclude from that is that it doesn't migrate up, obviously, 3,000 feet in 1 year. So the thing is, we don't know. We don't know if all those millions of gallons of toxic material, and if you do the math and you add up what's, say, happening in Pennsylvania, and if Pennsylvania gets fracked as much as they would like to frack Pennsylvania, the incredible amount, not just millions of gallons of toxic water, but millions of tons of chemicals are going to be underlying Pennsylvania. And you know, when you do that, you have to be absolutely sure that it's not going to come up. I don't think there's any assurity that the industry could give us that it's not going to come up in, who knows? There was a study by Myers that did computer modeling of it. He thought that as little as 10 years in some places that had a lot of natural cracks. Maybe as much as 100 years or a couple of 100 years. Personally, I don't want to do that to future generations. I want to be sure before we do that kind of thing. So part of my problem with fracking isn't just the quality of fracking, isn't just what we're doing and some of the things that could be dangerous with it, but it's the quantity of fracking. That not only are we doing this, but we're doing it a lot. And if we mess up, it's going to be a big time mess up in a lot of places. So that's that. Okay, anybody else? Yes, sir.
You talked about 1 million gallons of poisonous waste in a well.
Millions.
Aren't you referring to 1 million gallons of water?
The typical frac job, and it varies. I'm sorry, go ahead and finish.
If they put 1 million gallons of downhole lubricant in those wells, it would cost them so much money.
Well, it typically costs what, about $1 million per deep well, horizontal?
$1 million
or maybe
gallons
it's more than that. Maybe it's 6.
of
I can't
downhole
remember.
lubricant would cost them.
Well, I don't know the cost, but I will give you the numbers. And if you look, it varies wildly depending on whether you're talking about the Barnett down in Texas or the Marcellus in Pennsylvania, or even the Bakken oil fields up in North Dakota. The typical frac is about 6 million gallons of water, between 100 and 400 tons, not gallons, 400 tons of chemicals, and then typically several tens of tons at least of proppant, usually some kind of sand. So out of the, say, 100 to 400 tons of chemicals, they have, and again, the amount and the variety of chemicals they would use per frac varies very wildly, but they estimate somewhere around 50% of the chemicals of the ones that they use are toxic in some kind of way. They're neurotoxins or mutagens or endocrine disruptors or carcinogenic.
They're not vegetable oils?
Funny how they always say it's the stuff you find under your kitchen sink, but I looked under my kitchen sink and I don't have any of that kind of stuff that they talk about. Pardon?
You have to go to your garage for your motor oil.
Well, but I don't think they can toss diesel down there anymore like they used to. But if you look at the list of chemicals and how much stays down there, then yeah, that's a lot of toxicity that's below there, for sure. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
Most downhole oil lubricants are formulated using vegetable oils.
Well, if you read the list of chemicals, and that's all I could do, because I don't go visit frac sites every day. But if you do that, you'll find that it's not vegetable oil on any regard. If somebody's using only vegetable oil, very good, excellent, great. Yes, sir.
I'd like to just make a quick statement and ask a question. First off, my name is Mike Hogan. I started as a petroleum engineer in 1980 and have been in the industry ever since. I currently have a consulting business. I know a little bit about fracking since I've done it since 1980. I have to make a comment that the film, although it was entertaining, is probably about 85% false.
Say something.
I'm not going to go toe to toe over issue by issue. What I would like to do, and my question is, no, I said I was going to make the next part is my question.
Go ahead.
My question is, if the League of Women Voters are known for being unbiased and have an unbiased opinion, would they allow another film to be shown called Frack Nation, about the same length, maybe a little bit longer, which gives another opinion, and it's totally independent, was not sponsored or funded by the industry. But it gives a little bit different view by a total independent group, and it answers some of the questions brought up in your film. Well, so I think it would be very good if they're going to give an unbiased opinion to the general public about that. We neither have not the time to go into the details that you want to go toe-to-toe with over issues
I'm just saying, if you think it's false, tell me one thing that you think is false.
I could go on all day, as could a number of other professionals in the industry.
One thing that you think is false.
Claiming casing failure, probably less than 1%.
Well, the casing failure, the cement. Have you ever been to Rome?
Oh, I know you're going to talk
tons and tons of cement in Rome. It's still standing.
Well, I use the industry.
Go to the Pantheon and walk inside and look up.
I use the industry studies, Mike. The industry studies say 5% initially, and it gets up to 50% after 30 years. Do you have industry studies that say anything else?
There's tons.
Show me. You and I are going to be at the county legislature meeting on March 12th.
Exactly.
Bring your stuff and show me, because I've been looking for that. I've asked tons of pro-fracking people, and I've yet to see it. I've looked for it on industry sites all over. As I said, I'm not here to diss fracking unreasonably. I would love to see this kind of information that can make me a believer.
Let me ask you one other question.
Sure.
If they suggest a moratorium for a number of years until all these answers could be in, if there was a moratorium today on hydraulic fracturing, do you have any clue to what the natural gas price would be?
Yeah.
Do you have any clue to what your natural gas bill would be?
Mike, can you tell me
At least
how much,
8 times more than it is today.
Can you tell me how much natural gas
I don't even
fracking
know that we
supplies
can
now?
generate the power to light all the lights in many cities in the summertime.
Mike, there's also a very big environmental and health cost of hundreds of billions of dollars that we're looking at. That's why the information is so critical. We have to know what this does. You're saying it's perfectly safe. Well, there's other studies and other people that are saying, no, it causes these kinds of health problems, these kinds of pollution issues. There's scientific studies, university studies, government agency studies. The DEP has 161 confirmed cases of water pollution. I mean, there's a lot of...
Due to hydraulic fracturing or other issues? Has it ever been proven that it's due to hydraulic fracturing?
Okay, well, this is one thing, this is one area when I talk to my pro-fracking friends that we sometimes get into a little tussle about. Because I think what you're saying is fracking means just the instant that that pipe in the rock gets perforated and cracked. But I didn't cause this, but the media calls fracking the whole process.
Correct,
HVHF.
Yeah. It's a very small portion.
Right.
Of
So
the
I
whole
would agree 100% with you, Mike, that fracking itself, that split second when the rock cracks, no issues, no problems whatsoever. Ever. It's all the phases that come before that and all the phases that come after that that we do have issues with. And so you could talk about concrete in Rome, but I'm talking about concrete well casing seals in HVHF fracking jobs, and it's your industry that gives those percentages that I just gave, and I would love to hear some other news, and I haven't. I never have. Well, I mean, really, I'm anti-fracking now, but I would love not to be. So I hope you can convince me March 12th. Please do. Yes, ma'am.
How about a more simple question?
Thanks.
I know.
I'm not good at complex stuff.
I know when people talk about that we've been fracking for a long time, the old fracking, and then we have the new horizontal fracking. It's the chemicals that really scare me and bother me and what we're leaving for future generations. The old fracking, did they not use that big chemical cocktail like they use in this?
It was a difference in both. And this is where maybe you can jump in with, because I'm not all that familiar with the older conventional kind. I know there's a difference in both volume of chemicals and also the kind of chemicals.
Actually, the percentage of chemicals used in slick waters is dramatically less than what was used in conventional fracking.
But overall volume is?
It's less. I mean, the amount of chemical, the percentage of chemical in it, it's more water, it's more plain water.
As a percentage, but how about the actual volume? How about
well, to be honest with you, an interesting thing, when you look at a horizontal well, and let's say it has a 5,000-foot lateral.
Typical, yeah.
Okay. That well is replacing probably 6 vertical wells. So it's really, and it's not one big frac job over 5,000 feet. It's a series of frac jobs, and each one of those frac jobs is generally not larger than a conventional frac job that went on out here in some grapevine or grape vineyard down the road from here. And they're separated by plugs, each one. So it's a series over that 5,000-foot interval, equal to about the same amount as if they were all conventional wells, except in a 1,000-acre parcel, it would take 24 conventional wells to drain that parcel.
Right.
By going horizontal, you put one location in, drill 6 horizontal wells, and disturb 6 acres rather than
Mike, I hear that often, but the difference is that you would not vertical drill in these tight gas, shallow or thin formations. It's not economical to drill all those vertical wells that you were just talking about It would cost way too much money for the little bit of gas you get out of each one. The only way you can do it economically is to go down vertically and then do your long lateral. So when I hear people say, well, it's better to do...
It makes sense to do that because not only it's economic for our industry, look at the small footprint compared to 60 acres we're taking up 6.
But see, Mike, that's where I differ because you're saying, well, look, we're doing this one well pad instead of all these other ones. My point, and the point I've heard from a lot of other people, including gas people, is we wouldn't be doing all those little ones. It wouldn't be economical for us to do that.
I don't disagree with that.
Right. So we can't compare, lots of vertical ones to one horizontal one. We have to compare that one horizontal one, or in this case, the 6 horizontal ones per well pad, and these well pads every square mile. We have to compare that to not doing it at all as far as the
there's less
damage.
surface disruption with horizontal drilling than there was in the old.
If you were going to compare the two, but we're not comparing the two. We're comparing horizontal with nothing else.
On the surface, you can compare the two.
Maybe, but the point is you can't do them both at the same place. You wouldn't do them. Anyway, yeah, young lady.
I just have a question. I mean, you kind of lost me there, but my question is that I got this toxic wastewater produced from fracking. And when I say fracking, I'm talking about the horizontal. I know that they frack. Most of you guys know on Bose's Way, if you're an old timer. If you want to send them a wish, just tell me and I'll take it home to them. But it says that there was 280 billion gallons of toxic water from this new horizontal. I want to know what happens to that water. Where does that go? And I mean, that's my concern. That's one of my concerns. So what happens to it?
Most of it right now. Well, I shouldn't say most. Again, it depends on where your locations are, whether you're talking Pennsylvania or Texas or wherever. Instead of saying most, I'll say a lot of it is going into two different places. One is a lot of it's going to wastewater treatment plants and then being disposed of into streams and rivers. The problem with that is if you've ever visited typical wastewater treatment plants, not only can't they clean up some of the different components that are in frac waste, they don't even test for it. And that's one reason why in PA you got streams that had quite measurable levels of radioactive substances in them that were downstream from the wastewater effluent. That was about 6 months ago or so. If any of you know exactly, you can correct me. But yeah, so some of it's being treated at wastewater treatment plants, and then the effluent goes into the streams just like normal. A lot of it from Pennsylvania is going out over into Ohio, although from the way Ohio is sounding, it's not going to happen too much longer. And that goes into deep well injection, where they take places where they believe it's much more stable geologically, and the rock is permeable enough so that they inject it through deep wells. And as some of you have probably heard, that even though that's used in a lot of other industries as well, it's made some pretty big news in the fracking industry because of the quantity that it's been done. And in several states, Ohio, Oklahoma, some other ones, that they didn't check carefully, and they managed to inject right along fault lines. And really, there are some places where you can't help but do that. And it has triggered a lot of earthquakes where none had existed before, including a 5.7 in Oklahoma. So yeah, I mean, to me, earthquakes are a tiny, tiny part of this whole thing. It's not a big deal, but those are the two main ways that they're using the frac fluid that comes up now. And I think it bears repeating, most of the frac fluid stays down in the well. So it's kind of deep well injection anyway, because they're leaving so much of the waste down there. Now they are in some places trying to do more in the way of recycling the frac fluid that comes up, where they filter it out and make it usable enough, but then you still have the sludge that they have to get rid of, and a lot of that's being landfilled. There are companies that say, well, we're recycling most of it, and there are some companies that are doing that, but right now, as an industry-wide thing, from what I've read, that's not the case. Mostly wastewater treatment and deep well injection.
Are they also using it for snow and ice?
There is, Here's something I'd like to clear up, actually, because some of you have probably heard that New York State has permitted brine, which is the frac fluid that comes up, to be spread on roads as a de-icer in the wintertime and as a way to settle dust on our back dirt roads in the summertime. But in New York State has stipulated that it can only be New York State brine that's used. So it's only from the normal conventional vertical drilling. So we really shouldn't, and I know it's been spread in Chautauqua County. There are some other countries. Hold on, please. So it should be just the safer New York State brine that's been spread on New York State roads. But it's one of those cases that, can you prove it? I don't know. I don't know anybody that's actually gone and tracked it down.
30 years.
Yeah.
You said they're spreading frac fluid on the roads?
The flowback.
Really?
Yeah. Well, they call it brine, and because it is salty when it comes up, but typically about 8 times saltier than ocean water. But there's also other chemicals that come up with it.
Is that still
But
practice
that's a lot.
today?
But we're talking about vertical drilling, not the horizontal, so it's much more benign, much safer.
Another thing,
Yeah.
a question I had, you said there's trace radioactivity.
Yeah.
Isn't that everywhere? There, granite countertops, it's radioactivity in there.
Yeah,
So
how big
a trace are you talking
you're
about?
radioactive too, but the black shales are known for their radioactivity.
You
And
said
if you're
trace radioactivity. How much radioactivity are you talking about? More than my countertop?
Oh yeah, way more than your countertop.
You said trace, so I have no idea what that is.
I don't know if I said trace. I said radioactive materials, but that's the way they find these layers. So with a well logger, basically you're sending a Geiger counter down, and when the gamma radiation spikes, you're probably at a black shell layer. If you look online, you can see the traces that they use to pinpoint those things. And so when they drill down and bring up that material, then it actually, instead of being naturally occurring radioactive substances, it actually gets enhanced. It gets more radioactive than it was when they do like the sludge filtering like I was talking about. And so the stuff, say, going into landfills, etc., is much more radioactive because of that concentration process than simply the flowback that was coming up originally. So, yeah, that's one of the very big differences, and that's why I made sure I said, but in New York State, it's vertical, because the vertical is going typically down into the Medina sandstone and other conventional formations that doesn't have that extra radioactivity. The black shales are known for radioactivity, which is the unconventional HVHF kind. There's so much to talk about. Yes, ma'am.
Where is all this water coming from?
If you're a gas company, you don't. I mean, it's pretty expensive to do all that they're doing, and you don't want to pay for water if you don't have to. So, as often as possible, it comes from areas, streams and rivers and lakes. Sometimes they purchase it from municipalities. Painted Post was just in the news because of the contract they had to deliver water down to Pennsylvania. But
So
yeah,
they're taking water away from basically farmers for irrigation and
well,
people for drinking?
it's if you look at the overall percentage of water used compared to how much we have, it's not much. But some of the people that are against fracking will point out that one of the differences, I know it gets compared to golf courses a lot, that a typical golf course uses as much per year as a typical frac well. One of the differences, though, when a golf course uses it, they water the lawns, it stays part of the hydrologic cycle. Goes down to the streams, gets backed up into the clouds, etc. When you're leaving millions of gallons of frac waste down in the well, that's lost essentially forever. That it's not going to be returned to the hydrologic cycle. So in our area, is water use a gigantic concern? Probably not. We have a lot of good, clean water so far. In some other areas, is it a concern? For sure. Out in California, there's a gigantic fight going on now with the drought they're having, that fracking is using up too much water, and there's a very big fight between the oil folks and the farmers over who gets that water. And increasingly, water is going to be a bigger and bigger issue, for absolutely sure. Yes, sir.
You said before that they spread the brine water on roads. Does Chautauqua County still allow that? I thought they started that years ago.
If you go to, gosh, I think it's called Frac Tracker. If you, these all you know, all the websites have frac names, it's hard to keep it, but if you go to that, they have a map that shows exactly which roads it's been spread on, yeah.
As far as I know, back in the 70s or early 80s, there was a group called Logic. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they were one of the first groups to oversee like where the brine water went. And I thought they put a stop to that.
Yeah, I don't think so, because it's pretty recent news, because I know I've seen the map. I live in Cat County, and my county is pretty free as far as that, but I know in Allegheny County and Chautauqua County, there's a lot of roads marked in red where the highway department said they've used this. You can check with your highway department.
Oh, I just wondered.
Yeah, again, it's not one of those issues that I've gotten.
I do have I can help this gentleman with one answer.
Yeah,
in the old fracking, the wells around here, the towns and the county didn't want the frack fluid because it wasn't salty enough, right? However, the production brine that comes after the well is in production and it begins to decline. All wells have a decline curve. Then the water that comes in is saltier. It's pretty more solid brine. It does melt the snow. So that's the type of brine that the towns and the county allow. But they don't want the frack fluid primarily because it's not briny enough.
But I thought they even stopped the brine being there.
Are you?
No, I haven't. I don't think so. I haven't.
Yeah. So. Okay, but you can check it on that website. Yeah. Well, it's flowback, as I said.
Flowback from
it's when you inject the water, you get flowback coming out to a certain degree, to 1% to another.
For 30 or 40 years.
No, typically it's
very, very he's talking about is stuff from wells that have been around for 30 or 40 years.
He's talking vertical, right? Yes. Conventional?
Yeah, but I would assume that any type of gas well, as it declines, begins to produce more brine because it's all this is coming from ancient seabeds, basically.
Yeah, right. And it takes a while for that flowback also to dissolve the salt that's also occurring. Yes, ma'am.
So the salt that they spread on the roads with brine, how does that differ from the salts that they mine from some place like Geneseo?
Yeah, the ancient salt beds from around here is essentially pure salt. You know, it's when the seas dried up. The brine has other materials, not only from down below, but other chemicals that humans put down in it as well. And that's why we really, you know, I have no big problem with vertical fracking brine being put on roads, but that's why we really don't want the horizontal fracking brine to be put on the roads, because it does contain all these other chemicals and the radioactive materials.
Did the ancient seabeds come from global warming?
No, it came from uplift. As the sea that used to cover this area, the area was uplifted and the sea basically dried up because it was too high. I'm not sure where you're going with that, but...
Well, you have to think if there was an ancient seabed here and all this other stuff is filled in on top of it, there's had to be some kind of ecological change throughout the years. I mean...
It's just normal geologic processes. I mean, did you know, for instance, we used to be right on the equator? New York used to be the spring break capital of the world.
Well, it comes back real soon because I'm
yeah, we can talk about climate change.
25 years in oil and gas, no STD.
Now, if only we could protect the wells like that, we'd be all set. And I got a remark on that, and it's funny that he said sexual diseases instead of STDs, but I think what he's stemming from, there was a study done, commissioned by Food and Water Watch, that found, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. I mean, anytime you get a lot of people, especially anytime you get a lot of transient people, which, you know, that happens. If you go down into PA, West Virginia, you see that. A lot of people come in from other states, stay there for a while in the man camps. Anytime you do that, it doesn't matter if you're talking about an oil or gas camp or some other kind of industry, you're going to get an increase in crime, you'll get an increase in STDs, and that's true for this as well. You know, it's not any better or any worse than any other industry doing that. But it is certainly a consideration for a town that might want to consider, do we want that? Are our emergency medical services up to snuff? They're going to be stressed. Fire protection, police protection, all of those things go up.
Okay, so one more quick question then to you, sir.
Sure, then the gentleman.
What is the process involved to make a solar panel? What are the chemicals and everything else you need to
Well,
make a
that's a
solar
little
panel?
beyond the scope. I will
that's
say
fine.
this though. Let me give you some interesting news. And if you want some fast investment news, there's a company in New Jersey called Natcor. And let me give you a little bit longer, but still a fast answer. The old way of making solar panels generally use rare earth, which aren't rare, by the way. We just don't have a lot in this country. Some heavy metals and some pretty nasty chemical processes. The newer kind is quite different. Thin film nanosolar. If you look up Natcor, N-A-T-C-O-R-E, they're a company that's moving into the old Kodak Park in Rochester, my hometown, and they're going to be producing panels that are close to twice the efficiency, close to half the price, no heavy metals, no rare earths, and that's certainly a company to invest in.
So then why is your newer process better than our newer process?
Well, we could talk about that a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could.
Yeah, we probably could. But I think what you're really saying is every energy source has an impact. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah.
And that's absolutely true. And so we have to, both on a personal basis, like for instance, I get all my electricity and hot water from solar, and I get all my heat from wood, 100%. I made those choices because of where I live and what's available to me and what I think is the best thing. Everyone in this room makes those same kind of choices. And collectively, though, we as a nation, we as a whole global society, need to make those choices too. Because it's not always just free market that always picks the best thing for the long term. I think you'd agree with that. And so, I'm glad you brought it up because that's a good point. Every energy source has an impact. And we have to make sure we choose ones that are going to provide the energy that we need, that have the least environmental impact, and so that future generations down the road aren't cursing us out because of decisions we make. I think you were next.
Yeah, I've been to a number of these meetings here, and they've all been very negative towards the gas and oil industry.
You missed some of the ones I went to then.
Well, okay, then I did miss them.
Yeah.
But the ones that I have gone to, and I haven't been able to come away with anything new except for this movie. It gave me something very interesting.
Yes.
They said that if you push a product hard enough and say that it's good enough,
oh yeah,
that people will finally accept it. Well, doesn't that work in the reverse? And isn't that not what the academia and the people that object to this are doing? Is just putting it out there and just throwing it out there, any old thing, any way they can, just to make people believe that it's bad.
Well, I considered that too. I think that's a really good question. And first of all, I try to stick to as much reliable information as I can. If I can find a university study and check their funding and et cetera, then that should be pretty reliable stuff. There's also some industry stuff that's pretty reliable. But I think, the upshot is that what's the motive? If I'm anti-fracking, what kind of motive do I have to spend my money and time trying to convince people not to be fracking? My motive for this and any other anti-fracking thing I do right now is what I was raised with. Through scouting and other things, it's a conservation ethic that I think I need to make sure that we keep our waters clean as we need to have for future generations, and our air clean. Our health and our kids' health and our grandkids' health depends on it. To me, it's just simple conservation. But I also have to then look at, well, what's the motive of a gas industry saying it's perfectly safe? We've never had water contamination in all these years since 1947. And quite honestly, I don't know why they do that, because it's so easy to prove them wrong. If I were the gas company, I'd say, okay, here's what we're doing good. Here's the things that we're messing up on, and here's the ways we're working to make that better. I don't know why they do the whole, 100% denial thing, but I know what their motive is. Their motive is to continue to be the largest profit-making corporations ever. Nothing wrong with profit, but if you're doing it, you know, unethically, then maybe there is. Yeah.
I've been studying the ecology around here for 40 years, and by being in contact with it daily through my job with the gas and oil industry. And I have seen, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 species come in, but I've never seen anything that I've known from my childhood leave.
Well, that's good. And does New York have HVHF?
Not yet.
Not yet, right. And so, I mean, that's wonderful that so far we're fairly intact. And I think it makes good conservation sense to keep it that way unless we're absolutely positively sure that if we say yes to something like this, it's not going to cause the problems that we've seen people point out. I'm not sure who's next, but you're next.
I guess, well, I'd just like to say briefly, I see some people getting a little aggressive. Do you feel
My
that
classes always do that.
this has been, perhaps we should limit it to 2 more questions because it's a working person's night. And I do want to clarify just for a moment about the League's position on all of this. The League of Women Voters is, as you know, a nonpartisan organization in that we never support a candidate or a party, never. And we do believe that everybody should inform him or herself as much as possible about the facts as best they can be ascertained. But we do take positions on certain issues. For instance, we're in favor of equal pay for equal work between men and women. And we're in favor of limiting the amount of political contributions that can be made to candidates. In other words, we do have positions. It's not that we have vacant minds on anything. We hope we have open minds, but we do have stands on some issues. I just wanted to clarify that. So, 2 more questions.
I have a question for you then. I'll let you off the hook for a moment, Glenn. Earlier, you said that the League had a consensus?
Yes, we have a consensus among our members here locally.
With regard to this issue?
Yes, we do.
And could you share that with us?
Yes, we believe that there should be a moratorium on horizontal hydrofracking and the disposal and transport of its wastes until there are safer procedures in place. As many people said, we don't really know what can happen, so we are hoping that Governor Cuomo will not lift the moratorium, but we feel that if he does, local agencies should take steps to protect themselves. Our congressman, Congressman Reed, is generally speaking in favor of fracking, but he does not want to see horizontal high-volume fracking in the Finger Lakes region.
Where he owns the cottage.
Where he owns the cottage, because he thinks it will disturb the grape growing and tourism industry. And we say, if the Finger Lakes, what about our lakes? Aren't they just as good?
So the League is in favor of a moratorium, you don't want to ban it. You don't want to outright ban it.
Well, we would.
Or would you prefer a ban?
I can't speak for all my members.
Right.
But we certainly feel that at least there should be a moratorium.
A moratorium. Thank you. Yeah, now, can I have you just for a second?
And then I have a question kind of for the audience. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
You made a statement earlier that I don't believe is true.
Okay, what's that? And
you say when they frack, I mean, maybe technically it's true, but in a roundabout way it's not true. And so many of these are. When you say they frack and pump this water in the ground, they take it out of the life cycle of the water. They take that water out of the cycle.
Right.
When you burn the natural gas that comes out of the water,
produces water. Right.
Does it not produce water?
It does.
Does it produce more water than it takes
Depends
to frack
on the production of the well and how much it took to frack the well.
Right. I mean, let's say an average Marcellus well.
Sure.
So it's actually going to put more water back in the atmosphere than it would, just the average, typical, productive Marcellus well. It would put more water back in the atmosphere than it would take out.
Sure. I mean, when you burn methane, it
plus CO2
water.
plus methane.
Well, plus CO2 for sure.
Well, there's some CO2, but we're talking about the water. We're talking about the water. He's saying it's taking it out of those.
Well, it is. We weren't getting all the other aspects in,
right?
Because if you start doing that, then there's tons of other aspects to all of it.
There's a lot of discussion.
Yeah, there is.
But the one thing I will take issue with the film is the flaming faucet.
Do they have that there?
Yeah, that's it.
Well, the Duke, the UT study, there's many of them. The closer the proximity is to drilling, the more likely you are to have methane and a higher concentration of methane in your water. So the point I'm trying to make is just because you can have water or methane in water naturally, that says nothing at all about whether drilling induces methane into your water or not. And in fact, drilling can induce methane and other chemicals like arsenic, like selenium, like barium into drinking water.
Yeah. One more question. One more question.
Okay. Who's the lucky last?
Who hasn't?
Somebody that hasn't asked one first? Anybody?
There's one over here.
All night.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry. The lady in the dark.
I guess I have more of a statement to make than anything.
Sure.
There's a number of men and women here that work hard in the oil and gas industry. Probably get up at 5:30 in the morning much earlier.
Sure.
A lot of
people work hard at a lot of things.
They probably work all day long.
Sure.
It's cold weather outside.
Sure.
Producing natural gas and oil.
Sure.
Oil so that you can operate your vehicles, drive gas in cars. That's probably how most of you got here tonight. Natural gas so you can heat your home, especially in this cold, cold weather. To sit here tonight for the League of Women Voters, I'm ashamed of you, I'm sorry, but I'm really ashamed of you, that you present a movie like this that shows nothing but scare tactics. These men and women work hard in this industry. They live in this environment. They're not going to do anything to destroy the environment they live in. And if nothing else, if you don't like fracking, then you should turn the gas off to your house and not drive your vehicles, because that's all you have is fracked oil and fracked gas.
But
that's all I have to say.
So, ma'am, let me just toss this out. So, because natural gas is very inexpensive, and by the way, the industry did that on purpose. They did that. Overproduction. You don't know. Overproduction caused the price to go down. That did a couple of things. That caused municipalities and individuals to switch to gas, right? Would you deny that? It's absolutely true. That's also causing people switching from coal to natural gas. So, ma'am, I can toss it back. If I was a coal industry person, I could say, why is natural gas undercutting us so that coal plants are closing? If anybody has individual questions.